Hello, Abigail here with the astrology of this week. And everyone breathe a sigh of relief. We have fewer astrological events. Do we pick up again next week with kind of some more heavy hitters? Yes, but this week we only have like three things happening. And yes, that comes with the caveat of, we still have the Mercury retrograde happening. We're still winding down from that final eclipse. That won't clear until next week when we have the Pisces new moon, which I'm really excited for. But this week, it is a moment to kind of pause and reflect and to allow this energy to dissipate a bit. Stuff is still going to be happening that is related to the eclipses. Stuff is still going to be happening that's related to the Mercury retrograde. We also have a Mercury conjunction going on this week, but it is a softer energy. It is not quite as hard on the body. It is a time to kind of take a bit of an exhale so that we can inhale as we head into next week, which has quite a few events happening. Just for the record, it'll have the Mercury station direct. It'll have that Pisces new moon, Aries season starting, a bunch of other stuff happening. And as you know, once we hit Aries season, we hit the conjunctions with Neptune and Saturn as well. So this is our week between two pretty pivotal weeks to allow the energy and the universe to work on us and for us, to let things kind of, spiral out and pan out instead of having to constantly kind of be on edge and be on a trigger. Now, this comes with the caveat, another one, that this is not inclusive of your birth chart. So definitely check your birth chart and see if there's anything that's being triggered right now for you. But as far as like what is happening in the sky, things are kind of a little more chill. So we're happy to hear this. Starting on Tuesday, we do have Venus sextile Pluto in Aries. And this is a little bit spicy, I will say. We have Venus ruled by Mars, that is now in Pisces. We have, Pluto Pluto is in Aquarius, which is ruled by Saturn, which also has um, a rulership that is Martian because Saturn is in Aries. And so the energy is tense and also a bit confused and doesn't quite have a bit of a direction. Mars in water signs, even when it's not detriment or in fall, does tend to be a bit wandery, does tend to not be quite as direct, to not be quite as strict, for use of a better word. But it is still Mars ruled. So there is a bite to this. We are going to be seeing who and what has kind of failed us and who has supported us. We're going to see how our values have affected us. Thankfully, this is in a sextile, so the energy is more of like, how can we problem solve? How can we adjust? It's more of a review, especially with the Mercury retrograde, rather than like, oh no, something's happening. But realizations that are going to be paired with the eclipse energy of that South Node eclipse, which is an unraveling and an unwinding energy, and the Mercury retrograde, which is also a review. This week, it is really going to be an opportunity to understand context, to see how people have treated us, see how we've treated others, see how our relationships have affected us on a really deep level. This also is going to bring forward a lot of karmic stuff. So if you have karmic patterns, this is a really good week to kind of pay attention, to be aware if those kind of pop up and get re-triggered. This is more for us to kind of learn and understand and educate ourselves rather than to take any type of like major action. The major action has already been started by the eclipses and the Mercury retrogrades. I do think for some people, this is recognizing where we have not been met, where people have not taken care of us or fulfilled us, where we have not been able to advocate for ourselves. Also, a good reminder, Chiron has been in Aries for quite a while now, and every time a planet goes through those degrees of Aries over the past few years, they are digging up Chironic energy. And as Venus heads out and goes into Taurus, it will pass by Chiron, and Chiron will eventually this year be in Taurus. And so there is also this story in Aries where Saturn and Neptune are, where Venus is, where everything's going to pass through during Aries season, of the ways in which we have been harmed, of the systemic ways in which we have been wounded, of the violence that has been perpetrated on us, our communities. All of these things are going to be coming to the forefront. And it's a time to be like, oh, wow, this has been happening, and to pay attention to our participation in systems, to look at how our values have affected the collective, and to make change. It doesn't have to be big change, especially with the sextile, especially with, the chaos right now, but like just a mental note of being like, I don't want to accept this, or I'm not going to participate in this. Um, Also with, the adjacency to, you know, to Saturn and Neptune and all of these things. And the fact that, Pluto's in Aquarius, I would also say, a bit of a moment to look at your usage of internet, of things like AI, and to not participate in an exploitative system as much as you can. Obviously, by existing, we are forced into participation under capitalism, but we shouldn't be using things like ChatGPT. We shouldn't be using chatbots. We shouldn't be using AI to make our decisions for us. And I will stand by that. And if you are, no shame, no harm, but maybe, well, yes, harm, but like, don't feel ashamed and don't let guilt wear you down. Use any guilt and shame you have to make changes and to cut those things out of your life. This also might be a call for some people to remove themselves from certain social media platforms based on how you're being affected, based on the information that they are taking from you, the data they are stealing. It's a good time to check in with your time and usage on social media. For some of us, I'm disabled, I don't get out much, so social media is very much how I, as a very social disabled person, kind of feels a part of things. You know, it's not about not doing it or doing it. It's about being clear as to why you are doing it, right? Being clear as to why we participate in these things, as to our effect, and how that plays into our lives and the lives of others. It's not about necessarily purging or banishing anything. It's just being like, oh, I'm going to consciously participate and I understand the reasons why I'm doing this. And I've talked about this a lot, especially earlier in the year, especially actually kind of started around the last eclipses, not Shockworm, kind of, which was also pretty close on the, it followed up in a few months with another Mercury retrograde. You know, Coping mechanisms are necessary to survive the world that we currently live in. But what is important to do is to recognize that you are using them and to understand the purpose of why and how you are using them, so you don't get caught in them as an addiction, as an obsession, as something that takes you out of participation in healthy relationships. If you need to disassociate, we all do at some point. Doing that consciously, being like, yeah, I'm about to check out for a bit in order to like give myself some time to mentally recharge rather than just being distant or absent. It's also the choice to be present in relationship when we are interacting with people, and also to be like, hey, now I need space. All of these things are sextile things. They're easy solutions as long as there is awareness, but you have to have that awareness first. And I think that just starting this awareness in this Mercury retrograde, which I think is the magic of the Piscean energy, is that we're going deep into the subconscious, um, is to just take this and be like, how can I make these small changes, how I am present, how I show up, when I, at what point do I need to ask for space from someone? I'm very much like, uh, I'm very much like a little sloth hugging a tree when it comes to relationships. So I'm often the one that people, might need some space from. I'm maybe too hyper aware of it. And I often, preempt people's needs, which also unhealthy. But understanding who you are and how you behave and what might be needed in a situation is important. Knowing that other people have the responsibility to do this work as well. It's one, as someone who's deeply traumatized by life from a young age, it is important to take accountability and responsibility. It is also important to let other people take said things as well. So this is very much about understanding your impact and your influence, and how the way that you're acting is affecting not just other people, but also you and your quality of life. What are some things that maybe you're doing that are kind of affecting you poorly? On mine, I could probably go on and on about my sleep hygiene is not great. I struggle for many reasons. I have insomnia, but maybe I could try to get to sleep a little bit earlier. So that's an example of something that might help me show up better when it comes to relationships, when it comes to my own life, when it comes to my dog even. So just little tweaks when it comes to relationships, awareness around how we show up. And also, there are going to be parts of us that are just the way they are. And that's totally fine. But understanding that that is just the way we are and being able to communicate that to people. Like I said, I am just really love to be close to people. That's the way I am. There's nothing wrong with that. However, I understand that other people might need space. That's a good kind of example of this kind of Venus Pluto sextile energy of like, you don't need to change or shift or move anything drastically, but you just need to be aware, to understand your psyche, to understand the depths of yourself, very Pluto, and to appreciate how that affects you and those that you love. This also is going to bring out in people who are not aware, it is going to bring out, maybe some not great coping mechanisms. And you might have to have a conversation about this because of where Mercury is. So keep an eye out for that. My thing with Mercury retrogrades is like, I don't suggest planning to do any major talks, but if the Mercury retrograde has pushed you to a point where you have to have one, just have it. Maybe we try to push it towards, the Kazemi on the 7th, which would be my advice. Which by the time I'm doing this video, that Kazemi's already gone and passed. Maybe wait until it stations direct on the 20th, maybe. So not on the 20th, but a couple days into Mercury, into Aries season. But what I find with retrogrades and also being paired with an eclipse is sometimes you're just forced into situations. My thing is just like, go pull up your chart. And even if you don't know a lot about astrology, go see if your moon is around anything that might be helpful, like Jupiter or Mercury or Venus. If it's around Saturn or Mars, you might be forced into it anyways, but at least you know it's volatile. Anywho, off of my little rabbit trail on how to pick an electional day to have a hard conversation during a Mercury retrograde. On the same day, Tuesday, we have Jupiter station direct. Finally, it's been a minute. The retrograde started back last fall. We have been stuck at 15 degrees for several weeks now. Will we still be kind of sitting at this 15-degree mark for a minute? Yeah, just a little bit longer. But it's finally direct stuff when it comes to abundance and attainment and feeling kind of just all over good is slowly seeping back into our lives. Also, we're going to have a third Mercury Jupiter trine, which will be a direct one. Let me see when that is. Yeah, it'll be in a minute because we have to have it station, but it'll be in like 3 or 4 weeks. But we will get a direct Mercury Jupiter trine. We also will get that new moon in Pisces with a direct Jupiter. Stuff is going, like good stuff, the good things are going to start to feel more progressive. They're going to start to feel more important and more impactful, which I think we all could appreciate. Jupiter is exalted in Cancer. We have it there for a couple more months. It'll move, I think, either end of June or early July, into Leo. So we have a bit more time with this exaltation. We are past the retrograde at this point. So this is time to start kind of pushing the good stuff, trying to get progressive, positive things to happen in your life. I think a lot of manifestations that you made and were kind of like really like blaze universe during the Jupiter retrograde, they're going to start getting some legs on them. So look forward to that. It's going to bring a nice kind of refresh and release into this energy that we're currently in. Like I said, it's still stationing, which can feel a bit sticky. So don't expect it to like be fully progressive until the end of this week, but we are on our way, folks. And then the final aspect this week is, well, technically not an aspect, it's the whole thing. Conjunctions aren't technically an aspect because an aspect is an angle and 0 degrees is not an angle. But it falls in that category when we do charts and lists. Anyways, Sunday, Mercury is conjunct Mars. We had a Mars conjunction in January that was tied back to the last Mercury retrograde, and now we have this Mars conjunction that we will then again experience in a couple of weeks as well, because they're going to have that. Mars is going to move forward, Mercury is going to continue going that way, and then Mercury will catch up to Mars because Mars has a slower cycle. This is probably where some Mercury retrograde stuff is going to pop off, where some stuff that we have been pushed towards by the eclipse, by the retrograde, and we've been like, maybe if I wait until the Mercury retrograde is over, it'll be a better conversation. This is the day where the universe goes, you have to have this conversation whether the energy is good or not, and it is what it is, which often happens. My thing with astrology and picking elections is like I try to get the most optimal day, but sometimes you just have to do it. And sometimes that harsh astrology is what makes you have this conversation. So, unavoidable. This would be a day that I would kind of check your triggered responses. Doesn't mean you don't need to respond, doesn't mean you don't deserve to advocate for yourself, but it does mean that people are going to be a bit trigger happy. I also wouldn't be surprised if this weekend, like I said, I don't often talk too much about mundane astrology. I'm more interested in like personal astrology. I talk more about it with like fellow astrologers, but this is also a day we might be getting some kind of like aggressive declaration from people in power, not super clear declaration. One that is a bit confusing and doesn't really make a whole lot of sense, justifying another one of the horrible things they're doing. Um, with all of this astrology, you can harness it for your own good. So this is also a day to pop off. I would just be conscious of what hornet's nest we are kicking. If you're going to post something on Threads, just know you might get attacked by like a group of people you don't normally interact with. You might get misunderstood even by your own community because the Mercury retrograde conjunct Mars and Pisces, little friendly fire energy going on. So just know that if you're going to do stuff on that day that's kind of vocal and visible and out there, might be misunderstood, lots of typos probably. If Here's the deal. If you want to maintain a healthy relationship with someone, I would not suggest reacting and texting to them on this day. If you are ready to burn it to the ground, go ahead, do it. Astrology is never just like this is what's best for this day. You have your own natal chart. Also, what are your motivations and your goals? I have this a lot with synastry and composite charts. Less with composite because composite is more predictive. I find that with synastry charts, where it's like, are we compatible? It's like compatible in what sense? Because not everyone dates for the same reason. Not everyone wants the same future. Some people are more focused on sexual pleasure and that kind of stimulation and compatibility. Some people are focused on like wanting long term and stability and structure, and that's a very different read. And so when it comes to things like this Mercury conjunct Mars, it's like, do you want to light it on fire and let it burn? Do it. Sink it? Do it. Do you want to maintain it and be thoughtful? Maybe just take a little extra time to craft a response. Maybe ask yourself, how is this person perceiving me? Not to like cull or to like minimize and bridle your response, but to just understand how it might be received. I'm also a Virgo moon, Virgo rising, so I like strategize conversations sometimes. It's also the autism. So, overall this week, the beginning, it's very reflective, it's very thoughtful, it's, how have I harmed and been harmed, and how can we take action, even within a time that it feels like there's not a whole lot of, self actualization and like self motivated stuff with kind of being overwhelmed by the eclipses, the retrogrades, look at the world, that type of stuff. But then we hit that Mars Mercury where we do have an opportunity to act and respond, but we do need to be conscious of the energy that we are wielding and that we are fighting with. I will say Mercury conjunct Mars, might be a good day to break into possibly compiling a book of painful magic. Will it be chaotic and will you have to rewrite sections or reconsider some of your choices? Yes. But it is also time to kind of clap back with it being in Pisces. I will say taking some time to craft maybe a silly, goofy response that makes light of something more serious might be a bit more of the tone. Um, to me, it's especially with Mercury in detriment and fall, subversive language might get you further. Turning things on their head, using a bit of reverse psychology might be something that works for you, especially if you want some form of traction or attention. Nothing wrong with that. So yeah, this week is kind of this in-between week, just to kind of, since we have a little bit more time because there were less things to talk about today, just to kind of, you know, give you kind of a little peek. We have Mercury conjunct the North Node, some squares happening with the benefics, that Pisces new moon, Mercury station and Aries season, a lot of stuff happening. And um, a lot of kind of the major astrology of the spring starting to wind down and wrap up a bit, because all of those conjunctions in Aries are going to happen. Now we will have the Uranus conjunctions, but it is kind of like, oh, that the big the big clusterfuck of the spring is starting to wrap up before we get into the summer. We will have that final on April 25th. We will have the final um, Uranus ingress into Gemini. Um, but it does feel as though the eclipse stuff is going to be wrapping this next week and things like that. So know that we are building yet again to another peak. This is just how astrology works. We have new and full moons every 2 weeks. But this is kind of that week in between that might feel a bit breathless. And so, taking into consideration the astrology, still my regular warning of like, take it slow because we are in the eclipse season. But also allow things to fall away. That Pluto Venus sextile, that Mars Mercury conjunction, these are moments of cutting. These are moments of release. These are moments of recognition. If you've been holding on to something that's expiration date has been accelerated by the eclipses, that will become very apparent. I'll just tell you this. In a Mercury retrograde and in eclipse season, if something is not working, if something is not functioning and the dysfunction is amplifying, that dynamic doesn't really have a long-term label. And maybe you can turn it around with this person and like restructure the relationship completely, but it requires a restructuring. If you ignore the eclipse lessons, they will come get you later, either within 6 months or even a couple of weeks. I will also warn my manifestors and people who want their lives to change drastically for the better. A part of that manifestation is sometimes that we manifest our way out of relationships. We manifest our way out of jobs. We manifest our way out of connections that have expired. And it can feel like we're losing a lot and not gaining as we have been manifesting, but it is a part of the process that we have been involved in. And on us in a small way. Like, other people can make decisions and they can be bad decisions, but we are also, in a sense, choosing the clearing because we have asked the universe to drastically change our lives, to bring in new things, to bring in people who are more aligned. Reggie, no. He's been my Pisces, sun, Pisces rising, Pisces, what is his? South Node? Yeah, Pisces South Node, are all very triggered during this eclipse. He is my very heavily Pisces baby. I love him in my 7th house. Anyways, talking about my small golden dog. So yeah, this is the time to let that go. If you hold on, that's fine. Some of us have to learn an extra lesson. Some of us, like me, have traits in our chart that make us more likely to hang on a bit longer. But just know, if something isn't working now, it's not going to work after all of this is cleared either. Right now is the time when it is being revealed. Some people are like, oh, the person was drunk, they didn't mean it. Oh, the person was angry, they didn't mean it. Eclipse season is that kind of drunk, angry energy, and what it proves is that when people are angry, they're more honest. When people are drunk, they are more honest. So if anyone ever tells you that bullshit, no, that person means exactly what they were saying. Anyways, my dears, that is my astrology overview for this week. I wish you a very blessed week with a lot of recognition, a lot of awareness, a lot of rest, because this energy is still taxing and draining. And I hope that whatever happens, that it leads you to something better and something brighter.